Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Raj Kumari Niyogi and with me I have Sarah Payton. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Raj Kumari. Lovely to be here.
Yes, so excited. Today we're going to talk about understanding reactivity and alarm. And this is so interesting to me because I am so fascinated by many things, but especially around reactivity and responsiveness. There's such a movement right now called responsive org or responsive organizations, and so much of what we're talking about today in the 21st century at the workplace is the future of work. There's an amazing page of videos on Microsoft's website that talks about the future of work, and really encourage you all to watch it. It's quite fascinating. And in parallel to what Microsoft is talking about is a phenomenal book by Frederick Laloux, Laloux, called Reinventing Organizations, and talking about how to really come from a place of responsiveness rather than reactivity, and looking at when we feel threatened or alarmed, and how are we showing up, and how do we create a culture that invites self-management and wholeness of the individual, and something that he calls evolutionary purpose, or other people call the double bottom line, profit and purpose. So how do we begin to look at all of these elements in the context of reactivity and alarm?
Well, as you're speaking about this and wondering about these questions, Raj Kumari, what's coming up for me is the understanding that we have a single brain, that's our brain, and then as soon as we move into relationship with another person, we start to create pair brains and group brains. And so we create business brains. There's a way in which when we're all pulling together, and so beautiful that Laloux speaks about the importance of purpose here, when we're all pulling together in service of the same purpose, we're actually bringing our brains into synchronization with one another. When we focus on the same thing with other people, we begin to move into a group brain. Now, why is this important when we're talking about reactivity? This is important when we're talking about reactivity because just the same way that a single brain can be reactive, a group brain or a company brain can be reactive rather than responsive. Let's talk a little bit about reactivity in just one single brain before we circle back around to the group brain. In one single brain, we have deep in the brain an organ that is called the amygdala. And most research that's done about the amygdala seems to show that the amygdala is a filter, that it filters all of our incoming signals, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, how our body feels, what we're touching, smelling, what we're tasting, that everything that we are perceiving enters in and is filtered by the amygdala, which is looking for signs of threat and danger. It's looking for things that are happening in the present moment that have been difficult or painful for us in the past. The amygdala by itself actually has no sense of time. The amygdala lives in a state of suspended present time that stretches throughout our entire life. So that if we had a first grade teacher who cleared her throat in a certain way right before she would begin to humiliate someone in the class, then if our boss clears his throat in a way that is reminiscent, all of a sudden our body will go on alert, looking for the upcoming and anticipated experience of someone being humiliated, even though there's no other similarity between our first grade teacher and this boss. So here we begin to see the trickiness of being human and of being reactive. part of what makes humans reactive is that their amygdala has no sense of time. And I say they, and I should be saying our amygdala has no sense of time. I am not completely to be trusted about whether or not something is actually dangerous, unless there's, a truck bearing down on me, or a tiger is loose, or someone has a knife and is threatening me. Then I can be pretty sure that I'm making a correct assumption. But oftentimes in the workplace, when we become reactive, it's in response not to present time, but in response to the intrusion of the past. And I'll pause there for just a moment, Rajkumari, and see, how is this landing for you?
This is quite interesting, Sarah. The question I get the most from clients in the moment that they are being most emotional, so they've surfaced a thought or a feeling or a memory, and they're having emotions, they're tearing up, they're crying. The question that most often comes up is, but why am I still going through this? Why would I have this reaction right now? I know intellectually, that's the word they use all the time, I know intellectually that this is not happening, and yet this is how I'm feeling. And I think that your explanation really helps to paint a picture of understanding and comprehension about, even though the boss is clearing the throat, and I am simultaneously noticing that my entire body is becoming tense, now I might have a different level of understanding why that might be.
That's so true. And here we're starting to come back to what we were talking about in our third session. We were talking about the way that resonance changes the body and changes the way that we experience the world. The wonderful thing about the amygdala having no sense of time is that at any moment when we have a memory, it is available to us. When we have a memory that activates us, that we can feel in our body, that's still kind of hanging on, when we have that question, why am I still going through this? The most wonderful thing about that question is that if we're still going through it, it is available to be changed with resonance. I was on a conference call this morning with a group of women in Russia who were learning about this material. I used to be a Russian translator, and so I was teaching in Russian, which was a little tricky for me since I haven't spoken much Russian in 20 years. But they were very kind to me.
Oh, I did not know that about you, Sarah. That's very cool.
Very cool. And so we were checking in to see. There was a woman on the call who was having a strong sense that that the world was dangerous, that she could not allow herself to speak in a group because no one would want to hear her voice, and because she would tell herself that it was more important for other people to talk. So I sat with her on the marvel of the internet, and I said to her, when you think about this experience, when was the first time that you ever heard this voice telling you not to talk? And she said, well, I think it was in first grade. It was when I started school, and I didn't go to kindergarten. Everybody else had gone to kindergarten, but not me, so I got into first grade, and I didn't know what was going on. Everybody was moving so fast. They knew what was happening. It was really scary for me. And so I invited her to step back through time, to kind of time travel with resonance to that younger self, and to see what was happening for her, to really bring, now this is very important, Rajkumari, and I know that this appears in your work as well as in mine, to understand the difference between reassurance and resonance, to understand the difference between advice and resonance. When we first stepped back through time, this woman, I said, what would you like to say to this little one that was you? She said, I want her to know that these children are not enemies, that she can look for the good in them. And I said, that is all very well and good. That is a beautiful thing to say to your younger self. But if you were to guess how she is feeling, what would you guess? And she said, oh, she's frightened. She's so frightened of everyone. And so she really needs time and space to be able to understand what's going on and to get a clear sense of everything without having to rush. So here, that was such a different way to bring connection to this little one that she was. And as she did that, her body started to shift. Her body shifted in the memory. At first, the little girl's body was tingling with the fear and was frozen with the fear. And as this woman was in a resonant relationship, an understanding relationship with that younger self, her body began to soften and melt in the memory until there was a new sense of relaxation and curiosity instead of fear and reservation and guardedness. I'm sure that you've had similar experiences to this, Rajkumari.
So one that I'm thinking of right now actually happened a few weeks ago. The VP of marketing was in a meeting with the leadership team. They had VP of product, VP of engineering, and head of design. And the head of design and VP of product were asking questions to the VP of marketing, and she noticed herself getting defensive in that moment. And because of the coaching that I had been doing with all of them, with the entire leadership team, she actually was courageous enough and said, "Oh my goodness, I'm getting defensive. Just need to calm down here for a moment." And she kind of took a breath, thought about her thoughts. But she actually, and just before she had said that, had snapped at the VP of engineering. And the VP of engineering then backed down, and then this became this tussle. And a week later, the VP of marketing, shared the story with me in a coaching session and talked about how she was feeling. And I said, why don't you go back and address this with the VP of engineering? Something that I call in my work rupture and repair. So there was a rupture in the meeting, and there's an opportunity at any point in time, even if it's delayed, even if time has elapsed, to go back and make the repair. So VP of marketing actually did that. The VP of engineering brought that experience into her coaching session and said, "I couldn't believe it." VP of marketing came to me, asked me to go for coffee, and, we had this really great talk. We understood, what happened, and we mended. And I asked the VP of engineering, I said, "How did that make you feel in the moment that the VP of marketing asked to, in essence, repair with you?" But she didn't use those words, obviously. She said, "Let's go to coffee and talk about what happened." And the word that she used was respected. She felt so respected. And at the end, the two of them hugged briefly as they kind of walked around the block in San Francisco. And she shared the story, the VP of marketing shared this story much later in one of our workshops to the entire organization. And after she had shared her story, a person from a different department came up to the VP of marketing and said, "My goodness, that was so inspiring that now I want to go back and repair some contention that I had from someone else in the organization." And that's the type of ripple effect we want to create. That's the level of inclusivity that we're creating when we call the need for inclusive culture forward.
Rajkumari, it's so wonderful that you have taken this out of the personal into the pair. Because do you see, it's very much like what I was talking about with someone time traveling within their own history. This person was time traveling within a week and working with a different upset brain. Instead of working with their own upset brain, we're starting to see how the personal and the pair and the group and the company brain all have things in common, and that the different parts of our own brain are replicated almost like a fractal. We are a fractal of the groups and the companies that we're a part of, and we change their culture when we bring this kind of resonance and responsiveness and acknowledgement to the table.
I love it. This is why our work can be so incredibly transformative with the people who are willing to dive deeply with us. It's so rewarding. I love what we do.
So do I.
I love what we do.
So, Rajkumari, I've come to the end of what I wanted to say about Reactivity and Alarm Part 1. what's alive for you in this moment?
You know, I think what just flashed in front of my mind's eye, if you will, in the presentation that I give around disruptive diversity, there are two particular slides. One talks about the path to exclusion, and one talks about the path to inclusion. And interestingly, I was watching, some of you might know the show Scandal, and the main bad guy in the show was talking to a not so important bad guy, and he was kind of monologuing, and what he was saying was, you know, at some point you will be so sad that sadness will lead to disappointment. And at some point you will be so disappointed that disappointment will lead to frustration. And at some point you will be so frustrated that frustration will lead to anger. And at some point you will be so angry that anger will lead to rage. And at some point that rage will lead to indifference. And then he kept talking, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is the path to exclusion for me. And so I talk about, you know, as you begin to notice these beautiful breadcrumbs called emotions that are your reactive states, or as I say, your regressed states, right? Parts of you that may not behaving or acting or showing up in the most optimal way at the workplace in the moment. Then they indicate places where you might be excluding yourself, or you might be feeling excluded by someone else. And it's at that point to invite yourself to notice and to become more curious, and perhaps even engage with the person from a more responsive place rather than a reactive place. And then I decided to, okay, well, if that's the path to exclusion, there must be a path to inclusion. So I spent about a week and a half kind of doing some research, and I used a lot of the work from David R. Hawkins. He has something called The Map of Consciousness from his book Power versus Force. And if you look through his content, he does a lot of fascinating studies and with frequencies of emotions, and he actually measured the frequencies of emotions. And so I extrapolated from his methods and methodologies, and this is what I came up. So the path to inclusion is the following. When you have courage, you have the opportunity to be accountable. And when you are accountable, you have an opportunity to be optimistic. And when you are optimistic, you have an opportunity to be more accepting. And when you are accepting, you have an opportunity to have more understanding. And when you have more understanding, you have an opportunity to feel safe. And in the case that we talked about in our last session, we talked about belonging. So when we feel safe, we have an opportunity to feel as though we belong.
So true. Yeah. And as we just kind of on this theme that you've brought to us of how things link together, as we bring the compassionate and resonating self-witness to ourselves in moments where we are reactive, or in moments where we have a sense of not belonging, we begin to physically change the way the brain holds memory. We begin to build the pathways between the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain right behind the forehead and the eyeballs that makes us human, and we make more robust the fibers of attachment and regulation, the neural fibers that run between prefrontal cortex to nestle and hold the amygdala, to bring a lot of regulation and care to our own experience. As we even in this moment, Rajkumari, as people are listening to us and their brains are tracking along with our brains, and they're following the examples that we're giving, it's like they're doing baby push-ups for belonging. They're doing baby push-ups for being acknowledged. They're doing baby push-ups, they're little brain push-ups for developing a resonating and compassionate self-witness and holding themselves with empathy in this world.
And eventually I'll get to do some real push-ups at the gym when I finally have the wherewithal to get to the gym. Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much, Sarah. What a wonderful conversation. And thank you to all of you out there listening. Stay tuned for our next session.
We'll be talking about reactivity and alarm part 2, about how the body gets involved and how beginning to understand a little bit more of what we were talking about last time about how we interpret neutrality as hostility.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.